What's up, folks? Welcome back to LettermenRow.com. I am Jeremy Birmingham. That is Spencer Holbrook. This is The List. Spencer, we are on to the second version of the list, or I guess the second edition of the list, not a version, since it's fundamentally the exact same thing we did last week when talking about Keontae Goodwin. But today, part two of the list for Ohio State in the 2022 recruiting class. We're going to stay in Indiana. Spencer, who are we talking about?
Talking about defensive tackle Caden Curry, the number 80 overall prospect, according to the new updated 24/7 Sports composite rankings. 24/7 Sports, which is probably the most reputable of the three in the composite, has him as the number 105 player in the country, a little behind where the composite has him. So it gives you maybe an idea of where exactly he is in the national picture. But it's a kid that I think the Buckeyes really would like to have.
Yeah, there's no doubt he was one of the first defensive linemen offered by Ohio State in the class of 2022. He's 6'5", he's 250 pounds. He's also a dynamite baseball player at Center Grove High School in Greenwood, Indiana, outside of Indianapolis. And the thing with a kid like Caden Curry, I think that you have to look at is sometimes when you look at defensive tackles and defensive linemen in general, there's this idea that there's a prototype, right? If he's not 6'3", 290 pounds, maybe he's not a perfect fit as a three tech. Maybe he's not running a 4.45 off the edge, but at 6'5", 250 right now, what you see out of Caden Curry is a kid that could eventually end up in that 6'5", 280 range and play inside at nose tackle. He could play on a strong side defensive end role. Like, he's a very versatile guy. That's what Larry Johnson has been looking at for these last handful of recruiting cycles, guys that can play all over the line. And that's why Caden Curry was offered by Ohio State so early. That's why Kevin Wilson, Larry Johnson, Ryan Day, Mark Pantoni, the entire staff have made him a priority from the start. And what you then see is, as Ohio State makes a kid like this a top target, other schools start to get in the mix.
Yeah, I think he's the kind of guy that everybody says that guy needs to be on the field for the Rushman package. He just seems like the guy where you could line him up anywhere in this third down situations and he's going to succeed. He's going to get to the quarterback. I really like him. I think he's got all the tools that Larry Johnson hopes for. And then obviously you get him in that room. If he, if the Buckeyes can land him, you get him in that room and you don't know where his potential goes because Larry Johnson just works his magic. But he's a guy that I know the Buckeyes are high on, and I personally am really high on him. I'm not sure if he's like a generational defensive lineman prospect, like a JT Tuimoloau or a Jack Sawyer, but I think there is potential for him to be, a 3 or 4 year guy and then potential first round pick in the NFL draft. I wouldn't eliminate that possibility either.
No, and I think that that's a fair thing to say. What you're talking about when we're talking about must gets, I'm not talking about kids who are going to be guaranteed starters from day one. I'm talking about kids that fit the Ohio State program from a culture standpoint, that fit it from a talent standpoint, and fit it from just the amount of time Ohio State has spent recruiting him. There is a very obvious reason why Ohio State made Caden Curry such an early target. There's a very obvious reason why they've decided that he is the primary piece of that defensive line in 2022 that they're wanting to build around. And if you look at him as a sophomore, as a defensive tackle, he had 100 tackles, 26 tackles for loss, almost 11 sacks, 2 pass breakups. Like, this is a kid that can do a lot of different things. He is much more athletic than his ranking indicates. And I think sometimes because he plays in the central Indiana, he may not be getting the national buzz that he probably could if he played in Florida or Texas or California, somewhere else. I mean, it's funny to me how these things work. If you look at a kid like Caden Curry and put him at Denton Ryan High School in Texas, he's probably a top 15 or top 20 player in the country, just simply based on the competition they play week in and week out.
Yeah, I think there's some merit to that. You look at different guys throughout the processes that come from different schools in different areas of the country, and then you've got a guy from Greenwood, Indiana, and you just don't see many guys come out of that area. And so I think that there is some merit to what you're saying there. I think Caden Curry is the kind of prospect that Ohio State dreams of. Obviously, there's the obvious answers to Walter Nolan's of the world, those guys at the very top of the list. But then when Ohio State does its evaluating of these guys and understands who they are and what they are about, Caden Curry just kind of fits the mold of what Ohio State wants in its program, especially when you can't really say they put a fence around the Midwest, but Ohio State rules the roost in the Midwest. And to be able to try to land a guy like Caden Curry from all the schools in the Midwest and the schools in the Southeast, I think it'd be a huge step forward for the program.
Yeah, I mean, what you're looking at, main competition for Curry at this point is Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson are all very involved. And obviously, the idea here is that Notre Dame, which is the home state school, maybe have a little bit of an edge in recent months with the addition of Marcus Freeman, the new energy that's bringing to their defense, the focus on keeping kids like that away from places like Ohio State and Alabama. And you brought up someone like Walter Nolan, and there's a very good reason why we are doing the first, part of the list of defensive tackles on Caden Curry. And it's because he is the right fit for Ohio State defense and the right fit for the program culture. As I said earlier, this is not a kid like Walter Nolan, who, the number one ranked player in the country by a lot of people's estimation. That kid's not going to end up at Ohio State. I mean, I know he included the Buckeyes in his top 10 a week ago, but spoiler alert, that kid is not going to be an Ohio State Buckeye. He is definitely not. So, as you start to look down that list and who really matches up with what the Buckeyes are looking for on the field and off the field, Caden Curry, he's inside the geographical footprint that Ohio State really loves, that 3 hour radius of Columbus. He's a guy that Kevin Wilson, is familiar in that area and is helping out in the recruitment. And if you look at the defensive tackles in the country, he is the only one in the top 10, top 15, top 20, in the top 15. There's only two guys that are from above the Mason-Dixon line. That's the reality is, if Ohio State wants to compete at a national level with the Alabamas and Georgias and Clemsons moving forward, they're going to need to win some recruiting battles down south. But you have to win the ones that are up in the Ohio State geographical footprint, because defensive tackles just don't get built up here anymore. And that's just the way it is. I'm not entirely sure why that's the way it is. I don't know if there's something in the water that keeps, Midwestern folk from having super large children. I don't know, but whatever it is, you don't find many 6'5", 260-pound athletes like Caden Curry in the Midwest anymore. Most of them are from the South. Most of them are from the Southeast or Texas, and that makes it very hard for Ohio State to recruit those guys. And yes, Ohio State's brand, Spencer, is bigger than pretty much anyone in the country, so they're going to get their foot in the door. But to burst it wide open, it's got to take a different type of person.
Yeah, and like I said, Ohio State doesn't put a fence around the entire Midwest. That's impossible. But I think when you have a guy like a Caden Curry, who is in the Midwest, and like you said, is one of these rare guys that just happens to be from this area, then you really have to make the attempt and put your best foot forward in a recruitment. I don't think that's too much to ask from one of the top 3 programs in the country to try and lock down a guy close enough to their home to be able to make a drive. So I think
yeah, exactly. Go ahead. Sorry, finish.
No, you're fine. I just think that's one of those things where you look at the outlook of this class and you look at who are the obvious answers for Ohio State at certain positions. We always look at in-state linemen. You look at, is there a quarterback close by? Is there, who makes sense at which positions? Caden Curry just makes sense from every standpoint of defensive tackle for Ohio State. They could still swing and miss, but they're going to make a home run swing, and that's what's important here.
Yeah, the Buckeyes don't offer a lot of players from Indiana, if we're being very perfectly frank. They've offered 3 in the class of 2022. They offer kids that they think that they can get, and that's sort of their approach around the country when it comes to anyone. They don't offer kids just randomly if they don't think that there's a real opportunity. And maybe I'll rephrase that. They don't spend time building relationships with kids that they don't really feel like they can get. With Caden Curry, he's the number 2 ranked player in the state of Indiana behind Keontae Goodwin, who was the first player on the list that we did last week. So, I mean, obviously the Buckeyes understand that to continue to be a national power, they need to win the Midwest. And so, as you mentioned, fighting against Notre Dame right now for the in-state targets on the Irish's board is going to be something really important. Notre Dame made the college football playoff last year, and they went out and improved their coaching staff by bringing in Marcus Freeman after Clark Lee left to go to Vanderbilt as the head coach. So that battle is going to keep raging between Ohio State and Notre Dame until they get back on the field in a few years. And you look at Notre Dame; they won the battle for Joey Tonona, who Ohio State offered in the state, and they are fighting for Keontae Goodwin and Caden Curry and Damon Moore over in Fort Wayne. So it's turning into this thing where we've talked about Ohio State and Clemson in the last year plus about how they recruit a lot of the same players, but the Ohio State focus on culture fit, academics, and that kind of stuff in the last few years really means that they're running into Notre Dame quite a bit on the recruiting trail as well. And it does make it harder to win in the state of Indiana when Notre Dame is winning big as they have been. So that's, what makes this recruitment for Caden Curry really interesting. There is no timeline for a decision. He's a kid that has said over and over he'll commit whenever he's ready, but it seems like he has intentionally slowed down things in order to allow the dead period to go away finally and for him to visit schools.
Well, and let's not sleep on the fact, Berm, like you mentioned, Notre Dame and Ohio State will meet. They actually meet a year from September, like 2022, September 3rd, 2022. Notre Dame comes with a horseshoe, and that's a huge deal in the Midwest. I think that's something that could send some shockwaves through the recruiting world, depending on the result of that game. If Ohio State wins that game going away, the status quo kind of remains the same in the Midwest, and the Buckeyes can really put their foot down in the Midwest. If Notre Dame comes into Columbus and makes some noise there, you could see some recruiting momentum go different places, and that's rare for Ohio State to run into those kind of games. And so I think when you talk about Ohio State going against Notre Dame in these recruiting battles, it's going to be even more interesting and a little more heightened when they meet on the field in the next 2 years.
Yeah, in the last 25 years, Ohio State's played Notre Dame 4 times and thumped them all 4 times. And, that doesn't get overlooked by kids, as even though they're not really making decisions based on the outcomes of 1 game or 2 games or 3 games or even 4. But there is obviously a knowledge that Ohio State is the big dog in this part of the country. And if someone is going to step up and compete against the Buckeyes on the recruiting trail in the Midwest, because Michigan hasn't been able to in the last handful of years, Penn State has not been able to, Notre Dame is the team, especially because the Buckeyes and the Irish are recruiting a lot of the same players. So you're going to see a lot of these battles over the next couple of years. And what's fascinating to me is you look at a guy like Marcus Freeman, who I mentioned a few times now in this episode of the list, is that he's obviously an Ohio State alum. But by the time Ohio State plays Notre Dame in 2 years, he's almost guaranteed not to be part of the Irish coaching staff, because he's only made that move to Notre Dame so that he can prepare himself to be a head coach. So you don't know exactly how long that tenure is. So his involvement here may be minimal, because kids are savvy enough to understand that these assistant coaches and big time defensive coordinators like Marcus Freeman, young rising guys through the business of college football, aren't going to be there long. Yeah, anyway, Spencer, that's what we're talking about. Caden Curry is on the list. He is the second member of the list for 2022. That's Spencer Holbrook. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll be back next week to talk about someone else.